music. Welcome your hosts, Caddy Frank and Aaron Fitzgerald, as they lead discussions about substance use disorder and the journey to recovery. You're listening to Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution.
Well, hello. Welcome to Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution. I'm delighted to be here with a lovely Wendy Hack. She is with Minnesota Recovery Connection, and wowza, she's never been on the radio before, so we get to do this. Say hi to the folks, Wendy.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
Woo! So excited. Before we get to our What's Right With You, I want to make sure that we say a special thanks to our generous funders, including the Patrick and Amy Butler Foundation, Otto Bremer Trust, the Sewer Family Foundation, the Hardenberg Foundation, along with our many founders, foundations, and corporate and individual contributors to Minnesota Recovery Connection. We literally cannot do this without you. So that's one of the reasons why Wendy is here. She gets to talk about that stuff. But what we like to do, Wendy, is we like to start off the show with, what is right with you, my friend?
Well, I would say what is right with me is that I 2 months ago was able to join Minnesota Recovery Connection, and I am so thrilled to be a part of it.
Nice. Well, we are so glad to have you. So now you can ask me that same question.
Well, what's right with you, Caddy?
What's right with me, Wendy, is, let's see, I get to see a new face. Our show still talks about Erin Fitzgerald, and she has moved on to a new adventure, and she's going to be holding the recovery community in her heart. So I'm sending good vibes out to her. She's doing some traveling before she makes her big move to Puerto Rico. No, can't remember, one of those beautiful places down there. But what I'm really happy about is that I get to be here with new faces, and I get to experience this as the dream that's always that's come true for me, to talk to people on the radio. And it's just a great day. It's a beautiful fall day out there. So super grateful that we're here. So Wendy, tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe where you've come from, because Wendy got brought to Minnesota Recovery Connection because she's got a special skill set that is really important to the recovery community, as well as Minnesota Recovery Connection, as well as all nonprofit organizations. So give us a little snapshot of who Wendy is.
Well, I am a woman in long-term recovery. I've been in recovery for 28 years. And a little bit about my vocational journey. I graduated with a bachelor's in English back in 2011. And the first thing I did is I completed writing a book shortly afterwards about my story, which I'll share a small part of next. But the book is called Broken into One Piece. That's PEACE. And it's still available for purchase at outskirtspress.com.
Love, we have to do a little self-promotion there. Love that.
And it's written under the pen name of Susanna Qua. That's Q-U-A.
Wow.
Yes. And from there, my life kind of took a left turn, and I ended up homeschooling my kids for a few years. And glad I did that. They're both healthy adults today, and I'm very grateful.
Nice.
In 2016, I went back into the workforce, and I took a job as a managing editor at AVA, where we produced magazines for treatment centers, and we turned out over 75 magazines in the year that I was there.
Let me ask you a question. What's AVA?
Yes. It's AVA.
So AVA is AVA. Okay.
Yes.
No problem. Thank you.
Yep. And I was the editor of so many different informative articles about recovery, and I absolutely loved it. From there, I went on to be the editor for a recovery website now inactive called The Influence, which had over 1 million hits in 2016 alone.
What kind of stuff did the influencer talk about?
Well, we wrote articles, just basically recovery news. And I'll just give you an example. One that really stuck with me. I wrote an article called Russia's Biggest Problem Isn't Putin. And it talked about the horrible circumstances of people trying to recover between folks aged 15 to 55. Over 50% of deaths are alcohol related.
Yeah, there's a huge problem in Russia
Is
with
yes,
alcohol. We know that. We hear about
absolutely.
that.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
compared to 4% in the rest of the world. That's
Wow.
how big the problem is.
Wow, that's
Mhm.
aw horrendous and
Exactly. And the
heartbreaking.
treatment there is even worse. They basically you are cut off from all contact, and they
Mm.
basically shame you, and they put your name on a list so that any job, any employer, it's a public record that you've been in treatment. And
Oh,
so who wants to go to that?
yeah, I mean, talk about stigma. I mean, that's
Exactly.
just literally putting a target on your back.
Exactly, and that's their best effort at recovery, so it's a really
Wow.
bad situation. So after
Interesting.
that job, I did editing work for Hazelden for a few years, and then the George Floyd homicide happened. And I really felt like I wanted to somehow, some way be a part of helping that community. So I just
Mm.
prayed that there would be an opportunity. And I had a friend call me about a week later
Mm.
and told me about this new nonprofit that she was starting called the Minnesota Cooperative Conflict Collaborative.
Okay, now that's a mouthful of an
It
organization.
really is. And that's why we usually went by M3C, which is a lot easier to say.
MC3, I like
Yeah.
that.
And so I'm grateful to have worked there for many reasons. It gave me an education on how nonprofits work, but it especially gave me an education on how to be a better human.
Wow.
We held weekly community conversations that we called jazz sessions.
What was the jazz session like? What did that look like?
Well, it just varied from week to week, but generally there was always community elders of some kind or
Mm.
another on there.
Mm.
And we learned about everything from white privilege to what does racism look like and feel like, to substance use, to court rulings, to mass shootings. And it was raw, and oftentimes it was very humbling. There
Wow.
was an experience that I had where I wanted to just go down and be around the trial of Derek Chauvin and just be there as a support to the community.
Mhm.
And an African American gentleman said to me, "What are you going to do? You're a
Mm.
white woman from the suburbs. What do you have to say?"
Wow.
And so I changed my approach, and all I did was I brought down a bunch of Cliff Bars and just said thank you, because really that's all I could say. You know,
Wow.
he said there's people there that are like, well, my cousin was killed in a shooting,
Mm.
last year and died.
Mm.
How are you going to relate to that? So I learned a lot about myself there. My boss ended up getting a terrific position at the University of Minnesota. So we decided to close up shop. So I began praying for what my next step should be. And an LADC friend of mine who he suggested that I check out the Minnesota Recovery Connection, that he had heard great things about it, and that everyone who worked there seemed to be really happy.
Ah, well, I wonder how that all turned out. Because here you
Yes.
are as a person at our
Yes.
organization. So I'm curious, what did that person say about Minnesota Recovery Connection? What was their take on it at that point?
Well, one of the things that he said is that there were positions where you didn't have to go back to school to become an LADC,
Yeah.
but could still work with people in recovery. And that appealed to me greatly because of what I was doing like on the side during this whole time. So in the last 25 years in my private life, I had led a lot of faith-based recovery groups. I had been involved in the 12-step community for many, many years. I had done workshops around the Twin Cities on substance use disorder, sexual trauma, and mental illness.
Wow.
In 2020, I was a speaker at the International Stronger Conference on substance use addiction, and that was amazing because it was translated into several languages. So lots of people around the world had access to that information that they could find helpful.
Wow. Well, Wendy, you have a huge experience in the recovery community. And I think what's so interesting about that is that with 28 years in recovery, and you've expanded and explored a lot of different things. I can hardly wait to hear the story that goes behind that. So we're going to take a first break, and then when we come back, Wendy's going to just kind of unfold in front of us some of her personal story and her journey to recovery. So thank you for listening to Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution. We will return. Thank you.
The hair on his face is dirty, dreadlocked in for the main. He asked a man for what he could spare with shame in his eyes.
Welcome back to Redefining Recovery, a recovery revolution. I have Wendy Hack here. She is our new certified peer recovery specialist who took our class and had a wild awakening of what recovery can look like, as well as an extraordinarily talented woman in many different industries of the recovery community, the community in general, her faith community. So there was just this amazing amount of information that you shared in the beginning. So what I want to do is I want to kind of, when we're talking about recovery, we're talking about everybody's recovery journey is different, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's like it's all over the place. And you and I share the fact that we're women that have lived on the planet for a while. I call it mature. And that when you have a long time recovery, there's some real interesting things that come with that. We can like sort of filter out to a lot of different spaces and places. And there's people out there who are in their early recovery that are like, how do I filter out into some of these spaces and places? Because when we're locked in our addiction and we're coming out of that sort of that brain space, it's like, who am I? How do I move forward? So I want you to just take a breath and tell us a little bit about maybe what your journey was. Where are some of the places? And you mentioned something to me privately about how you kind of pieced your recovery journey together. So let's start there. How did that look?
Well, I really look at my recovery journey kind of like the life cycle of a butterfly.
Ooh.
And that I started off as a worm, and I then went into a cocoon that was very self-protective, and then there was something that cracked open the cocoon, and then there was a lot of struggle, and I emerged a butterfly.
What an analogy. I love it.
I I I love that analogy because that's the way that I feel. That's the way I feel in recovery now is I feel free, I feel beautiful, I feel loved, and I'm just excited to share my journey. Um, I grew up in a family where alcohol was readily available,
Yep.
and I come from a long line of heavy drinkers. But my dive into abuse of alcohol really happened when I was 16. I worked at a Burger King for my first job,
Hey.
and I naively, there was a cute guy coming through the drive-through, and I thought, I'm going to put my phone number in his bag of food.
Oh, you sassy girl,
I know.
you.
And so he called me that night, and lo and behold, he sexually assaulted me.
Oh, darling.
And I was too ashamed to tell anybody because I thought it was all my fault.
Oh.
And I just really dove into drugs and to alcohol. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was sometimes getting high 4 times a day. So it was pretty dire. I had a really bad relationship with my parents. When I went to college, I specifically chose a college because I knew it was a party school.
Okay, because you wanted to kind of sustain what you knew how to survive, right?
Absolutely.
Those skills of survival around an event, a trauma, I think is such a common theme with people because I know how to take care of myself, even though what we're doing is sometimes maybe the worst thing we could do. But I talk a lot about how you knew how to have that friend that would never let you down, which was, in your case, alcohol, and mine as well.
Absolutely. When I was on spring break that first year in college, I didn't have to work one night, so I went into a liquor store and I bought a quart of schnapps,
Mm.
and I went to a movie. I remember stumbling out of the movie to my car. I had
Oh,
drank most of the quart.
Wow.
and I drove around rip-roaring drunk. I crashed into a snowbank, and I got out and laid in the snow, and 4 men brought me into their home. I was listed as a fugitive. The police were out looking for me because I left the keys in the ignition, and there was still a little liquor sprayed all over the inside of the car.
Oh my goodness, girl.
The men lied to the police when they came to the door, and then after the police left, they took turns raping me as I went in and out of consciousness.
Oh, Wendy, I'm so
And
sorry.
yeah, it was hard, and a lot of people say, "Well, is that when you hit bottom?" And absolutely not, because I saw alcohol as a friend
Yeah.
getting me through the pain of my life. I didn't see that alcohol was causing all the pain in my life, and that's a fundamental difference.
Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Oh,
And then from there, I kept on drinking, I kept on using. In the following summer, I had an experience with an ex-boyfriend. He was an ex because my best friend slept with him, so that was heartbreaking and obviously broke a lot of trust with my best friend. Uh, and
I want to just take a step back a little
mhm,
bit, because at the what age were you upon all of this traumatic experience? Like, where were
I
you?
was 19.
So at 19, you had these absolutely horrendous traumatic events happen.
Mhm.
And you would not be alone at that age of people who had events like this happening. And so, what I want to sort of expand upon a little bit is that if people understand that when an individual has traumatic experiences, either like what you described, which are absolutely they're so great, I don't have words for it, but there are other people who have traumatic experiences, and what we do is we don't talk about them. We
Right.
bury them, and when
Mhm.
we bury them, somehow the only way that we can survive is to lean on something that we know what the result will be, which is the pain sort of subsides, goes away, but as you said, you think it's your rescue, but it actually is your enemy in a sense.
Yes.
And, I just want people, because when I look at you and I see your beautiful eyes and I see there's this pain that in just recanting that story, people out there that are the families and the friends and the acquaintances of people that are utilizing their chemicals, whatever they are, remember, it's not that person in that moment in time. It's maybe what happened to them. And I think that's one of the key components of a question that we ask people when we do our training is not, what's wrong with you, Wendy?
Uh-huh.
The question is, what happened to you, Wendy? And that brought you to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when I've been working with women over the last 25 years, one of the first questions that I ask them is, do you have any kind of sexual trauma in your past?
Yeah.
99% of the women say yes.
Yeah.
And the other issue is mental health,
Mhm.
and how that's affected your mental health,
Yeah.
which I had those issues as well.
I would imagine you also find women who have they have the sexual trauma component, but they also have abuse, and it might not
Mhm.
necessarily be sexual abuse. It could be verbal abuse. It could
Yep.
be emotional abuse. It could be all those other things.
Right.
Wow, because sometimes they sort of swim in the same soup, I would imagine,
Right.
because there's a control element of it.
Mhm.
Please continue.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so uh my journey took some twists and turns when it came to spiritual aspects of my life. I actually got very dark after,
Mm.
the group rape. I actually felt like if I did evil things that the devil would kind of work things out for me.
Mm.
That is how dark it got.
Interesting.
And I ended up moving into this home, 707 7th Avenue South, room number 7.
Okay. Wow.
Yes.
A lot of sevens
Okay.
going on there.
Yes, and I am not gonna dive into that because it's a rabbit hole that would take us longer than we have today. But needless to say, what came out of that is I met somebody from Campus Crusade for Christ, and I had an aha moment.
Mm.
My aha moment was, well, if the devil is really real, then maybe God is really real too.
Ooh,
And so,
twist in that one.
yes. So I started reading the Bible. I started going to a church, but I didn't really change my lifestyle too much. I still was using,
Mhm.
and it would kind of be like if I had a boyfriend, I was using, I was drinking. If we had broken up and I was on my own, I would do some church shopping.
Mm.
And this kept happening until I started dating this guy who was an atheist. And we would do cocaine, we were smoking pot, we were drinking almost every night. But I tried to convince him of the existence of God. And he said, "Well, maybe I'd believe you if you were living the Bible."
Ooh,
Yes.
there we
That
go.
was an aha
From an
moment for
from
me.
an atheist asking you that
Mhm.
question. Wow.
Absolutely.
Isn't it interesting how the
Yes.
mind
Mhm.
works?
Absolutely.
Wow.
And so then he broke up with me. He said, "You're an alcoholic. You'll never change." And I said, "I know I can't change myself, but I believe that God will change me."
Mm.
And so I moved into a little studio apartment in downtown Minneapolis, and I was either going to find God or drink myself to death. And I was getting blackout drunk to do my laundry.
Oh, do we have something in common there? Yes, I was a
Mhm.
blackout drunk as well. I
Mhm.
want to take one step back. You said that you church shopped.
Mhm.
And I would have to honestly say, in my years of using alcohol, I bar shopped because I had to keep moving around to different bars because I didn't want to kind of be identified. And isn't it interesting? Our survival mechanisms are so unique.
Mhm.
But isn't that interesting that you church shopped and you were trying to find some pathway for yourself, weren't you?
Right, absolutely.
Wow.
And what I ended up doing is one night I spread my Bible out on the floor. I got down on my hands and knees and I begged God and I said, "If there's anyone in this city who is really living by the Bible, please let me meet them and I will do anything, even become a geek." Because I thought all Christians were geeks
Well,
and
there
they
you
didn't have any
go.
fun.
I think of geek and
Yeah.
I think of like computer geeks, but you
Uh-huh.
know what? Okay,
Right.
that works.
Nerdy.
Yeah,
Nerdy.
nerdy. Got it.
And about a week later, I was sitting around a lake getting drunk by myself, and this man walked up to me and was doing a Christian survey. And I asked him, "Do you have any singles in your church?" Because I knew I needed friends
Yeah,
that were gonna want to do the same thing.
yeah.
And he said, "Oh yeah, a couple hundred." And I'm like, "Oh, can I come?" I wrote down the address, and I went that Sunday. And I tell you, it was just absolutely life changing for me. People were talking and laughing and hugging, and then the sermon. One of the points was, "If you are sick and tired of being sick and tired," and I was sobbing. And
Mm,
they asked if you wanted prayers at the end, so I went up to the front and I was sobbing. And the minister said, "I'll get my wife."
mm.
And so we went over to a Pizza Hut across the street, and I poured out my life and I said, "This is what I'm doing." And they said, "You know what? God can help you, and we will try and help you too."
Wow.
And so I studied the Bible every day that week. I got baptized the next Sunday.
Wow, you just were on the speed course.
I was, because I was like low hanging fruit.
Right. You were ready to roll.
I was. And
Wow.
for the first year, I did not drink at all.
Mm.
But my focus immediately went to food
Okay. Yeah.
and transferred.
Transferred,
Yes, all
twisted
of
our
that.
addiction. Yeah.
But a year later, I was at my parents' 25th wedding anniversary and I was emceeing it. So I was a little nervous. I was under pressure. There was over 100 people there. And I was like, well, it's a special occasion, so I can drink alcohol. And so I was drinking my wine cooler in the kitchen where no one could see me.
Yeah, because you wouldn't want to show anybody that you were actually
Hmm.
drinking because you were living this clean life and doing everything right,
Exactly.
right?
Yes. So then after that, I decided that because I was a Christian, I could be a social drinker now. And so I allowed myself drinks on dates and at holidays. And when I would go out to a restaurant with someone, I would obsess in my head, like, okay, I can have one drink every hour and then an after dinner coffee drink. That's normal. That's okay. Not realizing that social drinkers really do not think that way.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, and I mean, it's so interesting because I think when we are in still healing and you were sort of in you had gone for a long time and then you kind of gave yourself permission. I call it going back and just test driving that substance, whatever it is. We can rationalize anything.
Mm-hmm.
But your point is that normal people don't think about what they can drink.
Exactly.
Wow.
It always baffled me, like, how can you order half a glass of wine or a glass of wine and leave half of it at the table when you're done?
What
I'm
is
like,
that?
why wouldn't you slam the whole thing? Why waste that good wine? You know?
Oh, you are just reading my mind, but Wendy, oh my gosh. I remember back in the day, I'd be at some family function and there would be half glasses of wine, and I'd love to just toddle around the room and just say, oh, well, I'll just finish that. And
Mhm.
then, or go someplace else and have another cocktail someplace, because I didn't understand that there was an off button.
Right.
There was no off switch. When
Right.
you turned on that switch, it was on. And understanding that some people can turn it off absolutely mystified me.
Right. My desire to be a social drinker, it made me absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
I felt like there was somebody constantly tapping me on the shoulder saying, you know, you want another one.
Mhm.
And I heard a great example of this when I did get into recovery. This man was on a boat and a woman came and offered him a glass of champagne. And he said, no, I'd like a bottle of champagne. And she said, well, you can't have a bottle of champagne. And he said, well, I'm kind of messing with you. He said, but a glass of champagne, all that's going to do is frustrate me because that's not
Ah,
what I want.
right.
What I want is the bottle.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
that resonated with me for sure.
that brings me to a story about a very good friend who was on a boat, and he was living his recovery, and he went into the kitchen part of the boat, and there was a vodka bottle sitting there, and the boat was rocking, and the vodka bottle sort of rolled back and forth on this part of the kitchen boat, and it went tink against the wall and tink against the sink and tink against the wall. And he couldn't take it, so he had a cocktail, and he blacked out that whole night and was told what happened the next day, and he said, "Yeah, I drank last night." And they're like, "Did you?" Because they didn't know, because he was that kind of person.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like one is never enough if you're somebody who is still struggling with that substance. So anybody who thinks that an alcoholic, somebody who identifies as an alcoholic or a person who has a substance use disorder, one is too many, because
Mm-hmm.
one is never enough. To your
Exactly.
point. Yeah.
Exactly. So, what ended up happening, I had gone out to Syracuse on a mission team to help a church get started, and I ended up dating a man who was fresh off of crack.
Oh.
And those are the kind of people that I was drawn to.
Mhm.
And
'Cause we understand
he
one another.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
And he started becoming more and more dependent on me
Mm,
and in an unhealthy way.
certainly.
And so we heard about this program out of New York City. It was a chemical recovery program. And I thought, oh, wouldn't that be a great thing for him? You know,
Not
and
looking in the mirror at all at that
exactly,
point.
exactly. Anyway, he ended up relapsing. He left the church. I was heartbroken. But at that point, then I started thinking, I wonder if this would be a good program for me.
Wow.
And I asked a good friend, and she said, absolutely. And I was trying to make a decision between New York and LA. I was having a hard time making that decision. I said, I just don't trust myself. And she said, why would you? You lie to everybody. And I said, well, what do you mean?
Wow.
And she said, well, to this person, you're 30% open. To this person, you're 50% open. To this person, you're 80% open. She said, you're like a walking chameleon. And it was true.
Oh.
It was true. That was my character. And I knew how to do that because of my substance use behaviors. And so I moved down to New York City to participate in this program. And what they do is kind of a fourth step, and you write a journal.
Mhm.
And you write this journal of every single time you remember using. What happened, like what were the consequences, and how you felt about those consequences from the first time that you used to the last time that you used.
Yeah. So, yeah, interesting. Just want you to note something. That's I don't know if I could do what was that like?
It was incredibly painful.
Yeah.
And the thing is, okay, so I try to describe addiction to social drinkers because sometimes they don't understand it.
Yeah.
Like God created things in a cause and effect kind of way.
Hmm.
Like if I'm a young child and I put my hand on a hot stove and I burn myself, I learn I don't touch hot stoves because
Right.
those burn me.
Right.
But somebody with a substance use issue, they go to the hot stove and they burn themselves, but they're also getting numb.
Mhm.
And so they go back to the stove again and again, and they keep burning themselves. And a social drinker looks on and they say, just stop doing what you're doing. Look at how much it's hurting your life. But you see that as an essential coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
What a journal does is
Ooh.
you slam your hand down on that hot stove until you say, do you feel the pain that all
Mm.
you're using is causing? Is this what you really want to do? I read my journal to the group, and this woman looked across and she said to me, do you think you would have done any of those things had you been sober? Major aha moment.
No kidding.
I was like, no, I just thought I was kind of an idiot.
Well, and I think a lot of times you use the word idiot. We, the collective me, I felt that I was sort of like everybody else because everybody else did stuff like this because I normalized the behavior, even though I had to ask friends the next day. So last night was fun, wasn't it? Yeah, I think we went here and then what else did we do? Because we can't remember, but somehow we normalize that behavior. Or in your case, like I'm an idiot or whatever that is.
Or
So
I glamorized my use.
yeah.
I made it funny.
Yeah.
Like, look at what I did. Wasn't that hilarious?
Yeah. I'm
And
so
things
fun.
that really aren't hilarious.
No,
And
not
when
at
you
all.
look at it in a sober point of view, it changes how you feel about your use.
Ugh.
And that was essential to me because even now, it's like I get tempted.
Mhm.
I get tempted, and still the devil is right there and he says, oh, you could drink and no one would know.
Mhm.
And I would say, I would know and God would know, and that's enough. And you know what? Drinking is going to make that feel better for about a minute, and then it's going to make everything worse.
Well, whenever I've had that thought myself, it's like, I know there's a consequence coming down the line. I don't know what it is, but I've always said that if I were to pick up again, it would be jail or death.
Yeah,
Very,
pain.
yeah,
Pain.
in any way, and or I would cause some sort of harm towards another human, and that's what stops me. It's so interesting that
Right.
you said that you were tempted. I was in a class last week, and for some reason last weekend, just a whisper of a thought came into my head about having some sort of alcohol or something. And I thought, where the heck did that come from? And it came and it went, but it did flirt around with my head for just a moment in time, and I just thought, this is something I say all the time, and that is, I have a lot of recovery time, but every day I have to work on this because it is literally how I live my life.
Right.
I literally put it in at a true priority above all, literally above all, because if I don't put it in that priority space, it it could go sideways,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, I usually when I have a temptation like that, I go and talk to my husband and he'll
Nice.
say, what's going on with you
Yeah.
that you felt that way?"
Yeah.
And that's really the key to me. I had heard before that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection.
Human connection.
Exactly, especially with people that can understand.
Yeah.
And so just that opportunity to talk about what's going on with me, that's really important because we all have emotional pain. It doesn't matter if you have a substance use issue or you don't.
No.
We all need that connection with people.
And I think when we need that connection with people, and then there are times, regardless of what the issue is, there's an escape valve that we would love to hit. That we want to, I just don't want to feel this. I don't want to feel that pain. And for somebody who struggles with a substance use disorder or somebody who has mental health issues, sometimes that escape is so tempting. But then to your point, talking to someone, whatever that is. You said something earlier about you wanted to build your community because your community, we had sort of abused them or we used them, or they were people that I still am very good friends with a lot of people from the past, but I needed to develop some healthy, not even healthier, just different relationships with people who got me. They saw me back in the day and they saw my pain and the pain that I presented to them. But sometimes we have to develop, like you did, a new community with people who could see you from a different light.
It's amazing because uh, uh, there's so many people that I know that are in my life now, and just the wonderful, beautiful recovery life that I've been able to have. A great marriage of 25 years, two awesome sons,
Oh,
and they have a hard time believing that I had substance use disorder. But I tell you this, there are drug dealers out there who would have a hard time believing that I was ever going to get sober.
oh, absolutely. I mean, it's amazing. Jeez. Sometimes it's interesting when you work with somebody and you talk to someone whether there's similarities in our stories. And yeah, that is very true. I'm sure some people thought there's no way Caddy's ever going to come out of this. Well, we're about ready to head into our next break. And I just want, Wendy, you've just unfolded so much in front of me. So I can hardly wait for more. So thank you for listening to Redefining Recovery, Recovery Revolution on AM 950. And we will be back shortly. Thank you.
This guitar needs 6 strings, 'cause without it there's no song.
Yeah, let's try it.
Naisha, we need
And
to hear-
Heather.
Welcome back. Welcome back. This was one of the bands that played at our Walk for Recovery this past September 21st at the state capitol. And we'll be doing it again next year. So stay tuned. I think it's September 13th, 2025. But we have just heard an amazing life story, recovery, rejuvenation, finding oneself with Miss Wendy. And one of the things you previously said was my partner, who I've been with for 20 years, can't really imagine me as somebody who drank. And when you said that, I was just like, I could totally feel that. And then there's the people that couldn't imagine me finding my recovery either. And when we have that dynamic difference with the humans that we get in contact with, and I see it at work all the time, we see it with people, and like all of us are there. Most of us, 99% of us, are people that had this really big substance use disorder lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what brought you into Minnesota Recovery Connection and taking the class. So I'd love to hear about sort of like what got you to us, which we know is sort of the training, but then what are you doing for us? And what is that meaning to you at this point?
Well, the Recovery Coach Academy, I felt, was just amazing. I thought one of the great aspects of it was learning about motivational interviewing. And that is just about learning how to ask good, thought provoking questions.
Absolutely.
And it's so useful in every aspect of your life. And I got the opportunity to sit down with Minnesota Recovery Connections executive director over lunch. And I was kind of just telling her about some of my experiences in the recovery community and 12-step work and the workshops I've done and all of that. And the writing that I've done. I've done a lot of articles on recovery and just done a lot of writing and editing. And she said to me, we would really, I think, love to have you come on as a grant writer and also be involved in, the peer recovery specialist work that you are interested in doing as well. So it was just a wonderful fit, and I'm super excited about it. We have some grants that we've already written for just some expansion of services,
Yep.
which there's just such a capability of doing that in the Twin Cities area.
Yeah, well, there's so many communities that need help. When we were coming into this conversation today, we were talking about the idea is that there's so many communities that need help, but it's so hard for some communities to reach out. Sometimes there's language barriers, sometimes there's cultural barriers, sometimes there's just plain old fear and shame that are going on. And so bringing you on to Minnesota Recovery Connection with all of your vast experience in different spaces and places and communities and conversations, it's just like this perfect little match. And I got to see you in class just thrive and the peer recovery specialist training. So talk a little bit about what funding for a nonprofit organization is really how we survive.
Absolutely. It's the nuts and bolts, it's the behind the scenes work. And it's so necessary. Working for a nonprofit for 4 years, I was like, I love these ideas. I love, the creativity. I love just the idea of helping the community. But how are we going to pay for this? Because that's just a reality. And, it's just finding those perfect fit grants. It's searching it out. It's writing things in such a way that yes, we can meet these needs, and it's a balancing act for sure. But we also, rely on the funding of good people like yourselves that are going to contribute to what Minnesota Recovery Connection is doing. I think one thing that I wanted to point out, and I talked to Caddy about on the way over here, is that I have been in recovery for 28 years. I had never heard of peer recovery specialist work. That is something that I want to do everything I can to spread the word, because one of the things that I loved about the training is that there are so many pathways that lead to recovery. There's not a one size fits all, like you have to do things in a certain way. And I think that Minnesota Recovery Connection really supports that
Mhm.
and respects that. I've been in the 12 step world for a long time.
Mhm.
And you can run into some pretty dogmatic people that feel
Yeah.
like you have to do recovery the way I do recovery, otherwise yours not is not going to work.
Right. And I mean, what small sort of space that place holds, and a
Mhm.
small uh, uh, I was going to say a small mindset, but that's not true. There's a lot of awesome and incredible people in the 12-step
Right,
program, but
right,
it is one particular pathway. And it
right.
is written into our vision and mission at Minnesota Recovery Connection that we honor all pathways, and every pathway has validity in every way. And the idea is that when we can bring somebody in like Wendy, who has this vast experience in writing and editing and reaching out to communities and having really great experiences, bringing that networking, bringing that community together. That's what Minnesota Recovery Connection is all about. We call ourselves the best hidden secret in the world,
Mm.
but there are also all kinds of other recovery community organizations all around the state of Minnesota, but we're all nonprofit, and so our reach has a limit if we don't have the resources to do that. Because just so y'all know, money doesn't grow on trees. It's one of those things that we have to explain to people all the time. We don't just can't just deliver services and deliver ideas without having some way to employ the people who have lived experience in recovery to say to I can say to Wendy, you know what? We got a lot in common.
Mhm.
And that doesn't happen to everybody. And I think that's what you just hit on. It's this lived experience and pure recovery perspective that changes everything.
Well, and I think one of the reasons why my friend who's the LIDC said that everybody they encountered that worked at the Minnesota Recovery Connection was happy,
Mm.
I will tell you that when you are working with other people who all have come from a recovery background, you automatically have this connection with them.
Mhm.
You have a deeper level of understanding, love, respect, and joy
Mhm.
because everybody is living in recovery now.
Mhm.
And just being able to be a part of that,
Mm.
it's like a family.
Yeah.
And I love it.
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing is that it's like it's not always happy roses and butterflies and unicorns at any workplace. But when somebody is having a day, a moment in time, we've all, in some way, shape, or form, had that same feeling of being down or being upset or being frustrated. And we say, okay, now what do we do about it? Versus go get your stuff together. Come on, get over it. Get over it. We don't get over being a person that struggled with substance use disorder. My alcoholism, I didn't just get over, I had to work on.
Right.
And so, in a place like our environment or other recovery environments, we have this common understanding that it can get better, and being okay is okay. Being great, super awesome. Ain't that fabulous?
Mhm.
But that's not the reality of life.
And one of the things that was said every single day during the Recovery Coach Academy training was self-care, self-care, self-care.
Yeah.
And I love that because even now it's so easy for me to just, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this for other people.
Mhm.
And then you end up depleted and then you're more tempted.
Yeah. Or you just don't give a hoot about anybody or anything.
Right.
And when we
You
lose, crash and burn, and we can crash and burn and not use, but we can crash and burn and be absolutely useless for the people that we love the most, and that's where we come from. We want to give our best to people. We want to give a recovery perspective, and I'm just so delighted that you were here with us today. So, Wendy, thank you.
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah,
Love it.
it's just been a delightful conversation. So, for all of you listening, thank you for listening. Remember that join us in supporting our mission that we just talked about in any way, shape, or form that you can. Become a donor, an annual donor, a one-time donor. Hey, how about volunteer at Minnesota Recovery Connection? We've got opportunities for people to, like Wendy said, we need to build community around recovery. So, thank you for listening to Redefining Recovery, a Recovery Revolution. Have a great day.